I'm making my beater better on a budget. This time it's gonna be a complete front suspension redo on my favorite daily driver, the Red Duster. Now everything I show you is gonna apply if you've got a 60s or 70s Mopar, or really, you'll see tips and tricks for any kind of muscle car, maybe even vehicles beyond that. But before we get into it, let me remind you that I am giving away my 1990 Chevy Suburban 4x4 and $5,000. You can get the details at the link in my description or go to shop.davidfreiburger.com. You gotta enter before December 7th, 2025. I'm also giving away autographed Hot Wheels of Stubby Bob, autographed merch, so check it out. All the rules are on my website. Now, let's go get to work on improving the Red Duster. You know, I always say, don't get it right, just get it running. This is gonna be kinda right. Here's a car that embodies my mantra of don't get it right, just get it running. It's my 1971 Plymouth Duster called the Red Duster, and it started out with a completely clapped out, abandoned shell of a car with a lousy engine in it and the 3 on the tree, and it's become a lousy clapped out car with a junkyard 360 Magnum V8 in it and a used 4-speed and a used 8 3/4 rear end and some used 276 rear gears, and it's been glorious. You've seen it on the channel. I drove this thing on an amazing big long road trip and saw a whole bunch of cool stuff. I did have to work on the wheel bearings along the way, and that's where the don't get it right part comes in. This thing is not perfect in any way. I just made it run and drive so that I could find out if I was gonna fall in love with it. And I've fallen in extreme like with it. It's really, really good. But when you take it on a road trip with front wheel bearings that are of unknown origin that have just been in the car since time began, you're gonna end up fixing stuff at the side of the road. And here's where I really paid the price most recently. The front suspension is completely destroyed, and on that road trip, it just wiped out the front tires. I'll show you that in a minute. So in this episode, I'm gonna start to just whittle away at making it better. And that's the thing about don't get it right, just get it running, is I'm not saying that you never get it right. It's just you lower your standards of absolute perfection. You accept some breakdowns, you accept some rust, you accept some lousy appearance, and you have a car that you can actually use. And as you find out that things are wrong, you start to repair them. That's what's gonna happen here. The first thing you saw is an episode where I really went into like excruciating, painful detail about tuning up the carburetor that's on this thing, and to be honest, I'm probably gonna change that. That's a story for another moment. But now I gotta fix that wasted front suspension, so I'm gonna jack it up and start to tell you the whole story. Here's the first clue that I had a problem. This tire is completely wiped out. I can't even believe if you look at the bottom of it, you can see that the tread is sort of cut in at an angle because it's worn so badly. You can see most of the wear is on the inside. It also has a feather. That would indicate to me that it had really bad camber like this. The top of it was tilted in, so the tire was riding on this side. And I believe it was also towed in a little bit, and that's why that is all ruined. And so the cost of don't get it right, just get it running is that I did wipe out a set of brand new tires. So that's a downside, but now's my opportunity to fix it, get new tires, and change the suspension. So let me get this wheel off, and I'm gonna tear everything out of the underside of the car up front here. And by the way, I now wear earplugs with impact tools every single time. My tinnitus has gotten so wickedly unbearably bad that I won't hit a hammer on something or use an impact tool without the old plugs. All right, you're gonna be horrified as we go, I'm sure. Bad. I'm ready to start working on the Duster's front suspension, which is, of course, the classic Mopar torsion bar design. Mopar guys love torsion bars. It's like part of their personal image. What is a torsion bar, though? Really, it's just a spring. Instead of a coil spring to suspend the weight of the car, it is a long bar that twists in order to suspend the weight of the car. Chrysler didn't invent it. It goes back to the very dawn of the automobile. They were using them in the 30s in some vehicles. And of course, Volkswagens used them. But Chrysler put a stake in the ground in 1957 and said, all of the passenger cars in our lineup are going to have torsion bar suspension. They called it torsionaire. They had those cool 50s ads talking about, you know, how much cooler your life was going to be as you floated down the road with your torsion bars. But the design that we've got here really began probably in 1960, maybe 1960 on A bodies, 62 on B bodies. And the suspension design was so similar throughout the 60s and the 70s that what I'm showing you is going to apply basically to a whole lot of cars from the 60s and 70s. I guess specifically the Duster is going to be the same design for Mopar A bodies, Darts, Valiants, Dusters from 1967 all the way to 1976, and nearly identical, extremely similar from 1960 or 62 to 66. And then of course it's the same as the B bodies like Satellites, Chargers, Belvederes from 1962 to 1972, and then a little bit even after that. And of course the 1970 to 74 Barracuda and Challenger are also the same design. They do use different length bars and different parts, but essentially the tips I'm going to show you about how to assemble and disassemble it are all kind of what you're going to see here on the Duster. So now that you know that, let me move on to the embarrassing design of the front brakes on the Duster. Because my Duster is the most basic cheap model that you could get with an inline 6 in 1971, it has 9-inch drum brakes. I've been called irresponsible for driving around with a V8 on those brakes, but you know what? They've kind of been okay. If it was a 340 car, or maybe even if it was a 318, it would have bigger brakes, and disc brakes were also optional, 9-inch. Tiny. Of course, the A body of these years also has the unusual, very small 5-on-4-inch wheel lug stud pattern. I'm not going to change any of that right now because don't get it right, just get it running. I'm going to deal with the suspension, not the brakes, unless I take it apart and find a disaster. But you should know that if you're doing the front suspension on your Mopar, you often need the ball joint sizes to match the brakes that you're using. Many of the aftermarket disc brake conversions are going to use different size ball joints, and so before you rebuild your suspension, you should probably decide what you want to do for your brakes so that you're not buying ball joints twice. Now, in this case, I know that you can buy disc brake conversions for this spindle, so it's not too much of a risk, but if I wanted to use like the later larger factory Chrysler disc brakes, they do require a different ball joint and maybe even upper control arm. So first thing I'm going to do is rip open the brakes, even though I'm not changing them, because I do need to get inside there to get to the bolts that hold the lower ball joint on. But I'm going to show you sort of my step-by-step process once I get the brakes apart. I've got the brakes apart. Suspension-wise, the first thing I do is just back off the adjuster bolt for the torsion bars. Just take all the tension out of the suspension. Obviously, I've got it up on jack stands. The adjusting bolt is right here in the middle of the lower control arm. Loosen. There, just so that it sort of flops. You don't have to take it all the way out. Ow. That really hurt. That was a skull cracker. Next, I'm going to take the shock absorbers out just because they're in the way. The upper attachments are in the engine bay. The lowers are in the middle of the lower control arm. These shocks are pretty new, but they're terrible. Shocks are out. Now I like to put some rust penetrant on everything, and then I'm going to knock the tie rod ends loose so that the spindle will pivot freely for me. I hate it when these cans start to spray you in the eye. You know, they won't spray straight. They start spraying out of the nozzle everywhere. It's a nuisance. See that? Spraying everywhere. Everywhere except where I want it to go. Stupid garbage. Now I've got the tie rod off so I can spin the spindle freely. Now different guys have different routines about the process that they want to use in order to take all the ball joints out. Here's mine. First, I'm going to crack loose the upper ball joint nut, but leave it on there. Second, I am going to remove the bolts that hold the lower ball joint to the brake backing plate. At that point, the backing plate and the spindle are going to be kind of swinging here, and at that point I can go use a pickle fork and knock the top ball joint loose, and then that'll give me access to get the lower ball joint off the lower control arm. Here goes. Now I'm going to remove these bolts that hold the lower ball joint to the brake backing plate. First thing I'm going to do is take off the adjuster cable here that is in my way, like so. Now I've got this nut as a safety, and I'm gonna separate this ball joint right here. Got it. All right, I busted loose both ball joints. The spindle's completely off. Now all I've got hanging there is the upper control arm and the lower control arm. The lower control arm has two things attached to it. Well, it's attached to the K-member, and then the torsion bar slid in the back of it. But what I'm gonna worry about next is the strut rod that is a diagonal that moves from the lower control arm forward to a point that has some bushings in it. And there's a big nut there, and the OE used a roll pin through the strut rod to keep the nut from backing off. Now I normally put a cotter pin through there. This thing still has the roll pins, and so I'm gonna have to hope that I can get those out. I've been through this nightmare before. I've had to cut these out because of rust. So wish me luck, and it's getting dark. Okay, I am gonna need a pin punch. Okay. Ugh, not in a good place. Ah, this is always such a nightmare. Okay, what I'm gonna do is loosen the nuts on both ends of the strut rod and rotate it so that I can get that roll pin in a position where I can knock it up. Wish me luck again. It got dark last night. I know you couldn't see what I was doing, so let's recap. Here's my lower control arm. There is a strut rod that runs forward to some bushings in the K-member that has a nut in the front that holds it all together. There's also a nut back here that holds it all together. It's always sort of a mechanical challenge to figure out how to get the strut rods out depending on what disaster you're facing. Sometimes it is that pin, the roll pin in the front that locks the nut in. Sometimes that won't come off. Sometimes the nut is rusted on there. Sometimes this nut is rusted on there. And the thing is, this nut back here has to be tight in order for the bar not to spin so that you can get the front nut off. So it can always be a challenge. I found myself cutting them out. Sometimes you've had to vice grip them on there. This time it was fairly easy. I was able to lock this nut down, get the front nut loose, and the pin that goes through the bar that I'll show you once I get it out, I was able to break off both ends of it so that the nut will come off. So at this point, I've got everything loose on that bar. Oh, I should make another point. The thing about the rear nut is that you generally want to get at it last because you can get it off with an impact, which you can't do with the front. So if the front nut is loose and off, you can typically wedge that in there and get it off with an impact. All right. To get that bar out of there, though, you have to get the lower control arm out. And to get the lower control arm out, you have to get the torsion bar out. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do next. Here I am, way back here. The torsion bar connects up there closer to you in the lower control arm. Then it runs through this sort of mess of header tubes and suspension and clutch linkage and starter and garbage. And it comes all the way back here to a torsion bar cross member. And our job is to pull the clip out of the back of the cross member, slide the rubber boot off the torsion bar, and then I'm going to show you a tool that you clamp onto the torsion bar that you can then hit with a hammer to smack the torsion bar rearwards back out of the whole contraption here. Let's do it. And also I've got a super melty, useless old cut speedo cable here that I should probably get rid of. It's in my way. Okay. Here's my torsion bar removal tool. I think I left my original one up at Dulcich's, so I had to buy a new one, and it's a little bit chintzy. I don't like the fact that it uses 1/4-inch bolts to clamp it all together. I usually prefer to put one together with a 5/16. A friend of mine actually made one of these in high school metal shop that I had for decades and lost, and it was the best. But here's what this thing does. You can see I'm taking it apart right now. Has a little saddle right there that goes over the torsion bar, and then that clamps there, and then next thing you know, you have a bashing surface in order to hit the torsion bar out. This one is installed square so that you could bash either here or here. I prefer to bash on this edge. All right, let me go clamp this onto the torsion bar. Torsion bar came out pretty easy. One of my arguments for torsion bars is that that was way simpler than dealing with one of those coil spring compressors, which is what would have been done if I was working on one of my Chevys or something. Next thing is to remove the one nut that is holding the sort of spindle that carries the lower control arm bushing. Once that one nut comes off, then I'm going to be able to tap the control arm back and sort of remove the strut rod and the control arm kind of at the same time. Not bad. The lower control arm is out. That was pretty easy. Now I'm just going to do the upper control arm, which is also pretty easy. It's just removing nuts off of these two bolts here and kind of pounding the bolts out. And it's easier on an A body Mopar than it is on a B body, because on the A body, all of the stuff is on this side of the inner fender well, and on a B or E body, the nuts and bolts are on the other side. They're on the engine side. All right, let me rip this thing out of here. I would have had this done by now if it weren't for shooting video. This is actually a really fast job if you don't run into rusty nightmares. The driver's side's all apart. Now I just have to bang my way through the passenger side. I have this side all apart except for one common and nightmarish problem. You can see here that there is a spindle that runs through the middle of a bushing to hold the lower control arm in. This slides into the K-member, and there's a nut on this side. The problem is, when the bushing is completely destroyed, that spindle will spin inside the bushing, and you can't get this nut off. It's a disaster. Impact Tools have not fixed it thus far. I'm not sure what I'm gonna do, but hang in there. We'll figure this out. Got it. Did it. Okay, I was finally able to get that lower control arm out of there. It turns out I just had not applied the correct dosage of loathing. I finally did that thing where you go back and forth and ram and wedge, and it came out. Now, it takes a special socket to change the upper ball joint, and I don't have a press to change the control arm bushings. So now I'm gonna run all that stuff over to my local guy and also get some tires, and I will be back to change stuff like the idler arm and other miscellaneous stuff. Okay, getting hot now too. I'm back. I went and dropped off the parts to have the ball joints and bushings changed, and so now I'm going to move on and find out if, oh yes, I can get to the idler arm, so that's going to be my next job. I wanted to show you this tech tip. See this thing? It's a little wind gun. It's like Turbo brand. It was super cheap from Amazon, and it uses DeWalt batteries, and it blows really hard, and I've been using it for all of the crumbs of dirt that I knock off into the ground working on the suspension. I know you know how that is. And then of course you lie on them, you grind them into your driveway, but not when you just blow them out of the way. You do kind of have to throttle it like that because it's strong enough to blow bolts and things. See? Probably also needs earplugs. Anyway, good tip for blowing stuff out. Let's move on and change this idler arm. Do I even need to? I don't know. The tie rod ends were surprisingly good. Let me have a look. Well, I just crawled under here and removed the drag link from the idler arm and messed with it every way I could. There's really nothing wrong with it. There's no reason to change that. And surprisingly enough, as bad as they look, the same is true of the tie rod ends. They're all actually pretty good. So as bad as it looks, I'm going to save a few bucks and not change those things. I should also mention, by the way, that I looked at buying a whole front suspension rebuild kit for this thing, and I was able to go on summitracing.com and pick and choose individual parts. And I spent a lot of time doing this trying to save, I don't know, 40 bucks, but I was able to get everything cheaper buying through Summit individually than through the companies I found that sold big packages. And of course, the big packages also come with some stuff that I just don't care about, like let's say new rubber bushings for here, or jounce bumpers for there, and also for the lower control arm. So anyway, I saved some money by not buying the kit, and now I'm going to save more by not installing my new idler arm or tie rod ends. I'm going to return that stuff. So I think now the idea is big cleanup. You know, I like stuff mechanically clean. So I'm gonna hose. My parts are back. All of the new bushings and ball joints are ready for action. So now we start reassembling. I'm going to start by putting the upper control arm in. And the big deal here is that the control arm is adjusted by these cam-shaped bolts right here. And you want to make sure to have just a little skim of lube on the inside of them so that they slide freely in their ears inside the frame. I'll also make sure that there's no rust, crud, and dirt on those ears before I start putting it together. All right? Let me see if I can get this thing banged together tonight. It'd be really cool. Well, it's morning. It got dark last night. I don't know why that keeps happening. I was able to fiddle with the other side and get quite a bit of it assembled, but you couldn't see what was going on, so I saved this side so that you could see what was up. All right, remember I showed you that upon disassembly, you had to do sort of a dance with the lower control arm and the strut rod in order to get them sort of out? Well, it's that same kind of tango to get them all in. And so that's my job right now. First, I want to show you and talk to you about strut rod bushings. Here's your lower control arm. Here's your strut rod. The strut rod goes in the lower control arm like this and extends forward to the K-member where it's mounted in a bushing. And that triangulates the control arm so that it can't wobble fore and aft as you drive. The strut rod can also affect caster because depending on the length of it, it will either take this point in the lower control arm and push it rearward or pull it forward. If it pushes it rearward, that gives you less caster. If it pulls it forward, it gives you more caster. And these cars typically don't set up with as much caster as I would like anyway. Now here's the problem with the bushing situation. I have a feeling this car has never been apart. It was probably assembled by somebody on the Chrysler assembly line. Here is the one-piece rubber bushing that goes through a hole in the front of the K-member, and of course it's all smashed and destroyed and everything. But you get the idea how thin it probably was when it started life. It was thicker than that. But I bought, because they were the cheapest thing to get, these, let's see, Prothane polyurethane mounts. And look, you can see that they are much thicker than the rubber one was. Let's say the rubber one was right there to begin with. The polyurethane one is still maybe a 1/4 inch thicker. And the problem with that is that because they're not compressible as much, they effectively lengthen this rod and push that control arm point back, reducing caster. So that's not awesome. And some people will tell you that the durometer of these is too stiff and they can bend the strut rod because they don't allow enough flex as they go on here and are sandwiched right there in the K-member. So I have to admit, I do regret getting the polyurethane. This car obviously doesn't need the advanced handling and it doesn't have the other components in the suspension that would tend to go hand in hand with these. One thing I should mention is that QA1 makes an adjustable strut rod that I really like. And at this end, it uses a Heim joint to let the thing pivot so that it moves absolutely freely, not under bind like a bushing does. And it's a solid rod, and so it can't move fore and aft with bushing flex. I didn't feel that this car was worthy of that either. So I guess I've fumbled a little bit on this, on this butching situation, but you know me, I'm assembling it anyway and regretting it later because to change all that you have to take the torsion bar out and push the control arm back, which is the dance that I'm about to show you. Okay, I've got it greased here, 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 and here. I have the steering turned the wrong way. over the driveway, of course. And try and grease these so they don't squeak as much. They make special Gorilla Snot grease for polyurethane bushings, but I don't have any. Now, the trick is to sort of install the control arm and the bushing and the strut rod all at the same time, like so. And then assemble loosely. I'm feeling the front of the K-member here to make sure that the little lip in the middle of the bushing goes through there. See, this side right here goes towards the K-member because that registers in a hole in the K-member. Okay, sticking that on the front. Next up is the cupped washer. Then the nut. The problem is these bushings are so thick, the nut usually doesn't want to go on. Wow. Threads are not great on that deal. That's no good. That does not want to go on more than that. Okay, what are we going to do here? That is not good. That is not good at all. Okay, what's happening here is that this bushing is so thick that this nut won't tighten because the control arm can't slide in more because of the strut rod. So that is way ungood. I just officially swore off polyurethane strut rod bushings. I may have to actually change this. This is lousy. Wondering if I can tighten it up here enough. This is terrible. This is terrible. Let me see. Now it won't come apart because the, what do you call it, strut rod is stuck right here in the control arm. Question is, will this nut happily go on this spindle? Nope, I have a thread problem. Okay. Here's what just happened. I tried to install the lower control arm and the strut rod and everything, and I couldn't get this nut to tighten up. And I thought it was because that bushing was too thick, which it is, but it was in fact because the threads in the nut were gacked. And so I just put it in the vise and ran a tap through it. And I probably mostly unstovered a stover nut, but I'm okay with it. It's still got a little bit of stovering on it. Stovering's when the end of it is sort of pinched in the threads so that it doesn't come loose. It's a style of lock nut. And so now I'm going to give it another shot. So my MO here is, and by the way, I've got this all greased up here and here and here and where the torsion bar goes in. So my MO is slide the control arm in like that. Just hold it on with a thread or two of the nuts. And then here's my strut rod, which has a well greased up polyurethane bushing with the sleeve in it. And now you get to sort of fight centering that bushing there and getting the strut rod on the lower control arm, which meant that I had to take off the nut that I just put back on and put that in there. Sort of this in there, all at the same time. You know what? I am going to take it apart for a third time and grease this spot right here because it's binding in a way that I don't love. We'll see if that helps it come apart a little bit easier. And again, strut rod in, strut rod in the front, strut rod in the control arm in the K-member, washero, nut, and then this is the nut that goes on the booba. Now we find out if that control arm nut is going to tighten. Wow. Not to mention that's killing my ears. Putting greasy plugs in my ears. It's a little hard to see in here, but what you need to do is get this ring to touch the K-member right there. And that's what doesn't seem to want to be happening at this point. Let me give it a couple more smacks. I refuse to say ugga dugga. I think ugga dugga is probably on the outs anyway, isn't it? That's not cool to say anymore, right? I hope not. Okay. Got it. Wow, that was a ramrod. Yeah. Needs to be tighter still. Okay. Now the real question is, can I get the bushing lined up in the front of the K-member here? There. Bushing's lined up. Now I can put on the other bushing, which is here, which I already greased. But now is the bushing so fat that the nut will not go on? Let's see. Sometimes I'll take the nut and put it in backwards because there's threads on this side that are closer than the threads on that side. So if there's only one thread hanging. Yes, I got it started. So now I can tighten it down with a wrench and it'll smush all this together, and then I can take the nut off and turn it around and put it on the right way. The lower control arm and strut rod are in there. I should mention that after everything is seated, including the upper control arm, I go through any fastener that's holding a bushing and I just back it off a little bit just so that it moves freely, because I want to tighten all that stuff after the thing is sitting on the ground so that I'm not preloading any bushing in full droop and then putting it on the ground and twisting it and sort of limiting its range. And now, after that's in there, the next step is going to be bashing the torsion bar into it. I don't like to put the spindle on before I do that because I'm still at a point where I can rotate this and change the location of that hex that's in the back of the control arm so that I can better align the torsion bar. So that's what comes next. Oh, torsion bar diameter. The larger the bar, the stiffer the spring. That's kind of how it works. This is a 6-cylinder car. It's got the smallest, lightest duty, most worthless torsion bars that you can put in it. And I'm not changing that. It rides pretty good. And I don't know. I know it's wrong, but it's going to be okay, at least until it's not. And then I can change them. All right, I need to lie under there and probably wipe a bunch of grease and try and line up the hex in the frame or the torsion bar cross member with the hex in the lower control arm. And then, oh, you know that bashing tool that I showed you before? You don't really need it in this case. You can smack the torsion bar in through the back of the torsion bar cross member. You'll need some sort of brass drift in order to hold it at the back of it and hit it, though, so that you can get it seated all the way in. I've been procrastinating this job. And I'm under the car. The torsion bar is buried up in there. Where it goes into the torsion bar cross member back here, it's got to be all covered with grease, which it is, so we're good. From where I'm sitting, I can see the hex in the bottom of the lower control arm, and I can see the hex here, so I should be able to get them lined up. Let's see. Okay, it's in the lower control arm. Or is it? There. Might be off a little bit. All right, I'm going to smack the end of the torsion bar with a dead blow hammer, not a metal hammer. Ooh, no, that's solid. Okay, it's not lined up here at the back. So I'm going to have to go up front and step on the control arm to twist that end of the bushing. I'll fiddle back and forth. I'll end up getting it in. And once I do, I will install that little clip that you saw me remove at the beginning of the show. The torsion bar's in. All I had to do is push this down in order to get it all aligned, and then it became happy. And I just noticed I loosened that nut too much because it just popped rearward. I can fix that later. My next step is to install the spindle, and to do that first I have to install the lower ball joint, which does bolt through to the spindle. I like to install it first, like so. There is a right and a left. Did you know that if you have an automotive part number for a part where there is a right and left, the manufacturer should make the odd part number the left-hand side? That is kind of a standardized thing. I think it's fallen apart a little bit as there's no more sort of corporate memory about things. So I'm going to cinch that up. Of course, sometimes the stud in the ball joint will spin, especially on an older one, and you can solve that problem just by putting a jack under it to wedge it into the cone-shaped hole that's here in the arm. But I'm going to snug that down, and then I will come over here and bolt the spindle to the upper ball joint, and then I will slide through the bolts that attach it to the lower ball joint. And of course, go through there and cotter pin everything. Oh, and I have to cinch that nut up a little more. Here goes. Oh, one more tip. Here's something I like to do. Take a little tiny screwdriver and stick it through the cotter pin hole in the ball joint and align the hole so that it lands in a spot where the cotter pin is easiest to get to. I love that tip because I hate it when the cotter pin's really hard to get to. Oh, and also, what kind of cotter pin folder are you? Are you a split it and fold it around person, or are you a split it and fold one half up over the top person? I am a folded over the top person until I'm lazy and it doesn't work. Sometimes you can actually use a cotter pin to twist that stud too, like I just did there. And let's see if I can do it here to twist this stud where I want it to be. And nope, that one's too stiff. I'll go fix that in a vise. All right, now you know everything I know. Let's put it together. All right, last thing before I do the other side and set her down and cinch up all the hardware and take it for an alignment, shock absorbers. The shocks that were in this thing were just some part store whatevers that Steve Dulcich and I bought on Power Tour and installed in the middle of nowhere. And you know, these days I've just been completely dissatisfied with the super low level shock absorbers, which is why I tend to put QA1 double adjustables on everything, because you can tune them and you know you're going to be happy with it the first time because you can make it right for your car. But this time I just didn't want to spend the money, and so I went to the KYB gas adjust. Now, in my past experience, these are so stiff that they end up making the car ride kind of stiff. I mean, they're really hard. I've even seen them raise the ride height of a car a little bit. So this is experimental. We're gonna see how they work. I'm feeling a little regret, but I'm gonna install them and find out what happens. Man, these things are stiff. Hold on, watch this. That is a lot of effort. And then it comes right apart. It's gonna be hard to even install. Okay, how am I gonna do this? Like, compress. I'll be the guy installing my part store shock absorbers again. Hold on. Okay, reversing course. I'm going to install my part store shocks. See, I can push those together. I hate to say it, double adjustable shocks are expensive, but they're the way to go these days. Made in Malaysia, and doesn't say. They're the same length. These are a little longer. And in. Just like that. Did you watch me just talk myself out of those things right on screen? Guess it's something else I can send back, save a few bucks. Okay. See you soon putting wheels and tires on. Actually, you know what you're going to see next? Is probably a time lapse of finishing up the other side. The suspension's all wrapped up. Now I need to crawl underneath it and adjust the torsion bars with those nuts, or bolts rather, that are right in the middle of the lower control arms. And I've found that in order to get that right, you usually have to set it, drive it around the block, come back and forth to get the ride height that you want. For some reason, they just tend to settle. Let's see, I also need to put the wheels and tires on it, obviously, drop it down, and then tighten up some of those nuts on the bushings that I left just a little bit loose in order to tighten them up when the thing is on the ground. And some of those I might not be able to get to. I might have to jack it up again. So that's what is happening next. Oh, I need a cotter pin in this deal too. And just like that, out of the driveway and into the mountains where I can drive the Duster around and tell you how fantastic it is now. I was able to go to the alignment shop, and I'll show you the chart here of the numbers they were able to get on the front suspension alignment. I was super stoked that they were pretty even side to side. Also, remember I was concerned about the strut rod bushings being too thick and not being able to give me enough caster? Well, apparently I smashed them tight enough because we were able to get a couple degrees. Actually, probably as good as you're going to get with stock control arms. Now remember, just for suspension education, toe in is when the tires are like that. Toe out is this way. Camber is when, from looking at the front of the car, they're either tipped in or tipped out. My problem before is they were all cambered in. And caster is, if you're looking from the side of the car, is the steering axis tilted back or tilted forward. I was just mentioning that the caster is tilted back just a little bit. You can picture that if you're pushing a shopping cart that has no caster, it's when it starts to do this. And when it does have caster, when you're riding a bike or a chopper and it's laid back like that, it's a little harder to turn and it goes more in a straight line. Well, so far on my way up here, I've been really happy with the alignment. Let's go drive it on the mountain road, and once again, I'll inform you how fantastic it is. As I open the door from the inside, because the outside door handle doesn't work, still got to deal with that. Keep in mind that I didn't note objectionable performance before I started this whole thing, and that nothing I did to the suspension could be considered high performance. I didn't even use the better shocks. That said, I can absolutely tell a difference in how the car drives. The power steering is lighter, and it just turns into corners more confidently. It just feels better. Remember, I didn't even use polyurethane bushings except for on the strut rods because I wanted to keep it cheap and I didn't want it to squeak, and the rubber bushings are silent. The Duster has no sway bars and no one would call it a corner carving machine, but the basic stock rebuild was totally worth it. And this was easy. If I hadn't been shooting video, I probably could have had it torn down in one day, back to the alignment shop, and driving it the next afternoon. I should also tell you that my alignment guys were horrified that I would not just change the tie rod ends while I was there, so they did that for me, and they're not wrong. I think the tires are smoother as well. For the record, this thing is on stock front wheels, which I think are 14x6s, and the tires are completely maxed out size-wise at 225, 70, 14, and they are Cooper Cobra GTs. While the front end is good, look at this video under the back with a very mild launch and a weak power shift. The leaf springs bend a lot in the front segment. I gotta deal with that. In all, returning the shocks and the idler arm, I spent about $1,100 here. That's with all of the parts, the press work, the alignment, 2 dismounts, 2 mounts, 2 balances, and 2 new tires. Stuff just is not as cheap as it used to be. But on a car like this, it's more affordable to use the stock replacement stuff than to decide that you need trick parts. So I made my beater better on a budget, and I'll do it again as a comparison of a 750 double bumper carburetor versus a 600 vacuum secondary. It's coming up on the David Freiburger channel on this car. And there's a whole lot more. Now follow my social accounts and don't forget that you can enter to win my Suburban 4x4 before December 7th, 2025. The link is in my description, and I am David Freiburger on Facebook and Instagram. Good luck, and I'll see you next time.